International marketing is not something that's covered in the textbook that you're using. So this is let's get on the beginning, the first slide here. This is a adaptation by me, and I have used some material from a book by Karen and Peterson, which is called Strategic Marketing Problems, and actually a couple of your cases were drawn from the same book. So give them acknowledgement for some of the material in these slides. So international marketing, is it different than domestic marketing? Is it different to market things in Maine as opposed to marketing things in Kazakhstan or France or Japan? Yeah, there's a difference. And why do companies choose to go to a global strategy instead of a national strategy? I'm going to be talking about that. And then once you've decided that maybe you want to do that, how do you go about doing that? It's pretty complicated stuff. When we're dealing locally, we're dealing with cultures and norms that we understand. But then when we go even outside of our own region in the United States, we're dealing with different cultures and different cultural norms. And then when we leave the country, we're dealing with even more differences. It depends on where we go. If we go to Western Europe, a lot of the cultural thoughts and processes are somewhat similar to ours, but if we go to China or Japan, we're dealing with a totally different culture, and people think differently. And go to Africa, you're once again dealing with something totally different, or South Asia, India, whatever. You're dealing with different kinds of cultures, and you have to think about that from a marketing sense. So definition for a global marketing strategy is on this first slide here. Performance of activities designed to plan, price, promote, and direct the flow of an organization's offerings in more than one country. So more than one country. So I'm going to have a global marketing strategy if I market in the United States and Canada, but I also may have a global marketing strategy if I operate in 50 or 75 or 100 countries. So that's kind of what we're going to look at, and we're going to look at some of the theories and strategies around that. So the first thing you have to decide is, should you go global? Should you go international? Is it the right thing for us to do as a firm? And if we do go global, where should we go? Which countries should we go to? And we need to prioritize. We can't go everywhere all at once. So much like targeting markets domestically that we've spent a long time on, talking about in this course, we're going to target certain age groups or certain economic groups or certain sexes or something. Here we have to decide which country is the best target to go to. So we have to look at the whole world and then narrow it down to the ones that make the most sense for us. And there's lots of reasons that a country might make more sense for us. Our product might fit their culture or their needs. There may be less competition in certain countries than there are in others. There may be a better target demographic group of consumers in the countries that are going to be most attractive, or they may be logistically easier to deal with. So they may be closer or easier to get to or have better infrastructure, that sort of thing. So we have to look at all of those possibilities as to what a good market is, and we want to be logical and go to the easiest entry, best option market first, and then go down the list as we internationalize and go to more and more countries. As far as is it right for the firm, that's kind of a tough question. Should I go global or not? It's easier to stay local. It's generally less risky to stay in my home country. So when do I decide to go global? Well, I might decide to go global because I'm I've saturated my local or home market. I might decide to go global because there's lots of demand for my product elsewhere, or be a first mover, be out there before my competitors get there. Defensively, I maybe have a home market that companies from other countries are entering, and I may want to enter their markets as well, which is a defensive move. Lots of different reasons that we might decide it's right for the firm. If I'm in a market where I haven't tapped the potential of my home market, and I don't see any defensive reasons to move abroad, or I don't have a unique product that I want to be a first mover on, I may decide that staying local makes sense until I've capitalized on the market that I have close to me, or market that I have that is my home market that I understand best, before I go global. So generally, you'll see that companies in small market countries, so if I'm in a country like, say, Denmark, which has not a whole lot of people in it, I'm probably going to have a global strategy. I'm going to be selling in other countries within Europe and maybe worldwide pretty early in the stage of my company, because I don't have a very big market to address in my home market. So if I'm from a large country like the United States, where we have 350 million people and it's a pretty rich market, then in that kind of a market, I may well decide to stay at home much longer. So you'll see that large companies tend to go global at a slower rate than small country companies, because the opportunities are there at home for somebody operating in a large country. So if I'm starting a company in Maine, I do well in Maine, then I may expand to New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and New York. And then when I do well there, I can expand out to the Chicago market, or down to the mid-Atlantic markets, and then across the U.S. And that's a long process to go even national. So I may wait some time before I go global if I'm in a large economy like the United States. If I do decide to go, I have to decide how I'm going to enter those markets, and we're going to talk about the various modes a little later on. And what means am I going to use? Am I going to use the same marketing mix and targets that I use in my home market, or am I going to change those as I go to each market? So companies choose to change because they're trying to compete in a new culture. So if I'm McDonald's, I may offer vegetarian burgers when I move to the Indian market, and it's not necessarily something I'm going to offer in the United States, where meat eaters, where much of the Indian population are vegetarians. So I need to have a product that appeals. Hamburgers are not necessarily the right product in the Indian market. So I'm going to change my means there, or some companies choose not to change. They sell the same product everywhere. So I'm going to go global. Things to do: I'm going to spread risk if I'm in multiple countries. So if one country's economy is down, maybe another country's economy will be up. I'm going to hopefully grow, gain access to new people. It's especially attractive if in my own market, in my own home country, my markets are mature and I have a significant share and I'm not getting a bigger share. If I'm really, really good at something, I may want to capitalize on that. And in some cases, if I can grow, I can move my cost curve, I can lower my costs and achieve greater operating efficiencies by having higher volumes. So those are all reasons to go global. So what kind of screening do we want to look at? We want to look at quantitative and qualitative screening when we're deciding which countries to go to. And this slide specifically talks about those two criteria. Um, so what is the market potential? And how much money can I make doing it? And is it going to cover the costs of entry? So what's my market and profit potential? I'm going to go through a little exercise that I did when I decided to open a market for a European company in the United States, trying to figure out market potential. Um, and then what kind of variables are out there in terms of demographics and usage of my product. So I was bringing um, mountaineering gear to the United States. Obviously, there wasn't not going to be a large market for that in the southern U.S. because there aren't a lot of mountains and you don't need a lot of protective clothing in southern U.S. Because it's warm. You don't have the cold weather. So my target market when I was coming to the U.S. was primarily in the north and mountainous areas of the country. Then the other qualitative, what's the infrastructure like? Can I get my goods to where I need them to be? What kind of social and cultural factors are they? Is the product I'm selling going to fit with the social and cultural um, mores of the country I'm going to? Trade regulations and product regulations have to make sure that I can bring my product in successfully and negotiate all of the regulations. And what do the competitors look like in the market that I'm looking to enter, whether they're local competitors or other foreign competitors, as I would be a foreign competitor. So trade regs and product regs really important. I think in some of your other courses you've learned about import and export regulations, and it's incredibly complex and difficult, and understanding what you're doing is really, really important. So it depends on the product, and then you have to do the research to figure out what kind of regulations, and every country is a little different. The trade regulations and product regulations are going to be different in different countries. So we talked about market and profit potential. I'm going to give you an idea, and generally you have to, whatever product you're looking at, you have to figure out, how am I going to figure out what the potential market is? What kind of sales, if I do it well, what kind of sales can I hope to attain? And that's difficult because in general, those numbers are not obvious, and you can't just look them up in the census or Google them. You have to figure it out where you're going to fit, what your niche is, and then where you may be able to go with that niche. So I was bringing in mountaineering gear, and I knew who the primary competitors were, almost all of whom were US, so some of them were foreign, in the US market. And so what I did was I used the competitors to figure out who the retailers, what retailers I could target. I did this for every state in the nation, and I'm using Maine here as an example because some of you may be familiar with some of these stores. So I took the names across the top. So Arc'teryx, Marmot, the North Face, and Mountain Hardwear are clothing manufacturers, and I was selling clothing that was similar to those four manufacturers. Dana and Osprey make packs, high-end backpacks. The company I was going to bring into the U.S. also makes high-end backpacks. And Sportiva and Loa make boots. Those are both actually European companies. They make mountaineering boots, and the company I was going to bring in makes mountaineering boots. And then Western Mountaineering makes sleeping bags, and the company I was bringing in makes high-end cold weather sleeping bags. So I looked at these brands and said, who are their dealers in Maine? So Arc'teryx has two dealers in Maine. They have Kittery Trading Post and Maine Sport in Rockport. Marmot has these dealers. North Face has these dealers. Mountain Hardwear has these dealers. Dana, Osprey, Sportiva, Loa, and Western Mountaineering. And I had made a calculation because of my distribution plan that I could only sell to retailers doing more than $1 million in sales a year. And I used various ways to get volumes for these dealers. So Kittery Trading Post is the biggest at the time in 2004. They were doing $40 million of volume. Cadillac Mountain Sports was doing 6 million, Main Sport doing 5 million, and Alpenglow and Orono was doing under a million, and the rest were well under a million. So there was nobody else in Maine. The only three targets really that met my criteria of $1 million or more in sales were these three here. So I had three potential targets. I then looked at these dealers and I said, anyone who's carrying three or more of these brands is a potential target because they're selling high-end products. So this is all high-end outerwear, packs, boots, and sleeping bags. And if they're selling these products, they'll be able to sell my products. They have a market for a high-end product. So I've narrowed it down in Maine to 1, 2, 3 targets. That represented, Kittery just has one location, Main Sport has one, and then another small one, so 2. And then Cadillac Mountain at the time had 3 locations, 4 locations actually, 3 in Bar Harbor and 1 in Ellsworth. So those were the potentials. So that gave me Maine. I had to do that for every state in the nation. It really wasn't that hard. I actually did this myself. So basically just pulled these companies that were selling product that was similar to mine, looked at the retailers they were selling to, and had some criteria as to who they were selling to. Then I reduced the list to just the people carrying 3 competitive brands and doing, more than $2 million in sales. So, so 40, 5, and 6 were my 3 targets in Maine. So those were the people I wanted to target that I thought would be able to sell my product. So nationally, I did the same thing and came up with 65 retailers with a total number of stores of 125 stores, doing total sales of $425 million. So that's retail sales, 425 million. I estimated, because I know the industry, that about half of their sales would be clothing. The majority of my sales would be clothing. So about vast majority of my sales. So that was $212 million of wholesale sales. And their margin on clothing is approximately 50%. So they were going to spend with their suppliers $106 million. And I felt that I could potentially get to 10% of that market. So what I've done here, and this is just my numbers, but what I've done here is said, who can buy my product? Where are they? How big is this US market for this specialized high-end clothing? A little bit of boots, a little bit of backpacks and so forth, but primarily clothing is where most of the volume was. So how many dollars can I do in the US if I implement my marketing plan successfully? Targeting just high-end retailers who are doing high volumes for specialty retailers anyway, not particularly high volumes, but high for that particular kind of product. And I said, if I'm successful, I can get to 10 million in sales. And then I could say, okay, if I can get to 10 million in sales, does this work? Can I make this work financially? So now I can go from there and go back. If you go here, I've figured out my market potential is $10 million. What's my profit potential? I know what my costs are going to be. I can figure out my costs. I can figure out all of that. So that's kind of the process. And you're going to do that. I don't care what the product is. That's what you're going to do. And you're probably going to have to figure out a way, like I did. You have to figure out a way to determine market size. Unless you're getting into the auto market or the steel market, there's no statistics published out there as to how many people buy, mittens or slippers or whatever it is that you might be marketing. You just have to figure it out. And this was actually a very successful way. in reality, in doing this, I ended up, when I sold the distribution back actually to the manufacturer, the French manufacturer, I had 42 stores, and we were approaching 10 million in sales. So we 42 retailers and had about 100, I forget what it was, 110, 112 doors. So we exceeded our expectations because we did that in 3 years instead of 5. I had expected it would take 5 years to get to that number. And so we were successful. We managed to predict the market and actually exploit the market and get to that targeted market share. So it worked, but it was a little bit of a shot in the dark. You never really know what's going to happen until you do it. So when you're looking at market attractiveness, what markets look good depends on the SWOT deal again. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What kind of offerings you're going to have? I'm going to pause for 1 second here. Sorry about that. Got a phone call. We're looking at the kind of things we're offering. We're going to look at what kind of policies and practices we're going to use, and we're going to look at the kind of financial resources that doing this is going to require, and do we have them? So our characteristics determine what we're going to do. So taking that example back to the product I was bringing in, I had an extremely strong product with no name recognition and never been sold in the U.S. or totally unknown in the U.S. And I had significant domestic competition from people like North Face and Mountain Hardwear and so forth. But I had strong product, and the specialty retailers that I was looking at were feeling pressured because people like the North Face were expanding their distribution in 2004. North Face had been sold primarily through specialty retailers, but they were moving into general retailers, people like at the time Macy's and Dick's Sporting Goods and people like that, who weren't specialty retailers. And the specialty retailers were threatened by that. They wanted, their channels were being expanded. We've talked about channels. The manufacturer was going to new channels, and they were threatened, and they were looking for new products. So I felt like there was an opportunity. So that was a strength. Weaknesses were we didn't have any infrastructure in the US, so we had to deal with that. And we didn't have any name recognition in the US. So what were my marketing policies and practices were from there, and then my financial resources were somewhat limited, but I had a fairly strong company in France that was willing to take some financial risk as well. So that was good. And then what kind of adaptations do we need to make between home country and foreign markets? In my case, I had to change sizing because European sizing was quite different, at least for men. The women's sizing was actually right on with US sizing, but the men's sizing was way too small. So the largest size they made, which was an XXL, was about equivalent to a US large. So I needed to get them to change sizing, which is a significant adaptation for a clothing manufacturer. How do you increase sizing? And that takes some time. So this 2004 was the market study, but I had already in my own stores started selling this product starting in 2002. So I had done some market testing, and they were willing to adjust sizes and adapt sizes. So that was a big part of an adaptation that we had to make. Americans are bigger than Frenchmen. American males are bigger than French males. So that was an adaptation. So let's stop the lecture here for the moment, and then we'll go on to part 2 after this. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk about how we actually look at different kinds of modes of entering markets in the next section. Thank you.